Welcome back to the garage. Today we're going to be looking at putting the crankshaft into this block. This is our 5.9 Magnum build. We're going to put the crank in and we're going to check the bearing clearances for the main bearings. What we're going to need to put this together, beside the obvious needing the block, crank, main caps, we're going to need a rear main seal, which you can buy that individually, but they also come with the full gasket set. You're going to need a set of main bearings. I prefer Clevites, but there are less expensive options out there. And then we need some sort of an assembly lube. This lubriplate, assembly grease, something along those lines to help lubricate everything. And lastly, we'll need Plastigage in, I've got them in several different sizes here. The green is the most likely what we'll use, but I've got several. We'll go through how to use all of that in this video. So let's get started. It's worth mentioning that you'll also need a torque wrench. So this is a micrometer style. You can use a needle style, digital, whatever. This is just one that I've had for 20 years and it's one I'll continue to use. So the first order of business is to make sure everything is clean. We don't want any debris getting in any of this. Just make sure you've wiped everything down, gotten it nice and clean. So now we're going to put in the upper half of the rear main seal. You can see, focus. There we go. You can see it's asymmetric here. We've got a fat part and a thin part. This fat part goes toward the front of the engine or the inside of the engine. The thin one goes to the rear. So we're going to put it in like this on this one. Goes into this groove. First, just feel the groove, make sure it doesn't have any burrs in it. Make sure it's clean. So we're going into this outermost groove. Again, the thin edge toward the outside of the motor. I like to just put one corner in here and we just push it down. Try to get it flush on both sides. If you find it sticking up just a little bit, I'm going to tap it with just this plastic headed soft hammer. Now when we final assemble this, we're going to put a little bit of RTV here and here, but we're going to be putting the caps on and taking them all back off, so we don't need to seal it right now. It is important that we lubricate this so that it doesn't grab onto the crank and tear it or turn it. So we'll just put a little bit of lube here on my finger. Make sure we get it nice and slippery. Primarily, we're trying to make sure that those wiper edges are lubricated. Next, we'll do the bearings. The insides of these bearings are quite soft, so you have to be protective of those. You don't have to treat them, like they're eggs or anything, but you don't want to score or gouge the insides of these. So the upper halves all have oil passage holes in them. So those are the first ones that we're going to be putting in. Now notice, every one of these bearings has, right here, it's got this alignment notch. This one has it. This one has it, right? That alignment notch matches this notch here, here, all the way down. So this rear bearing, and again, I like to do the same thing I had done here. I'll put that alignment notch in, kind of put my finger on it to get it flush on this side. And you'll feel, doesn't really, it feels like it's a little bit bigger. So what has to happen is you have to compress it inward just a little bit as it goes in. And we're nice and level there. One of the bearings has thrust surfaces on it, but it still has this alignment notch. It goes here. And then the remaining three are all identical. Alright, I just make sure that they're flush all the way down. Next, we want to apply a fairly liberal amount of lubrication to all of them. Make sure you lubricate the thrust surface on this bearing on both sides. Okay, we've got it fully lubricated. Now we're going to seat the crank in there. When you're putting the crankshaft in, you want to be careful that you don't drop it into the saddles. You don't want to create flat spots on those bearings. So we just kind of line it up and lower it down on. Now, do not rotate it at this point. We don't want lubrication up on the journals where we're going to do measurements. I'm going to take a rag, just give them a good once over, make sure that they're nice and clean. Okay, so we now have the crankshaft in. So what we're going to do is we have to bolt down and torque all of the main caps with a little bit of Plastigage in each one. Then we'll take the caps back off and look at the width of the Plastigage, and that'll tell us what the bearing clearance is. Alright, so the Plastigage really is, there's a little thread of plastic inside this package. The paper is just so you don't lose it, and to provide you some way to measure. So what I'm going to do, just going to open it up at the end here. You can see it. That's our actual Plastigage. And we want to put it longitudinally across the bearing at the midpoint between the two sides. So we want it really even here. Just going to use some wire snips, cut that off of there. We'll see if I can get it to stay because this motor is sitting at an angle. So you can see, I just cut a piece and I lay it on there. And we take the proper main cap that goes on here. This is the rear one, so it's real obvious. We're going to take this main cap. We're going to take the lower half of the bearing. Again, we've got this alignment notch right here. Get it flush here. Slide the bearing in. Dry. We're going to put it on. So I'll get this main cap in place. Then I'm going to grab a couple of main bolts. Just a little bit of lubrication onto the threads. So I put just a little bit on there. Helps the torque be accurate, to be clean and lubricated. I'll run them in by hand. I don't need to torque them down yet. Notice I did not put in the lower part of the rear main on this. I don't need it yet because I'm going to take it back apart and then reassemble it. So when I take it apart, I'll put it in then. So now I'm going to repeat the process for the remaining 4 of these. I'll cut a small piece of Plastigage, put it longitudinally onto the journal, then slide the cap with the bearing on. Do not turn the crank or it'll just smear the Plastigage inside there and you can't measure it. It is important that they go in the correct direction. They cannot be reversed. The alignment notch on the bottom cap goes in the same location on this one, this orientation this way, goes in the same direction as the saddle on the block. Okay, now that I have all of those in, we're going to torque them all to spec. This one's 85 pounds, or 85 foot-pounds for this. I'm just going to snug them up first, get them all to that point. Then I'll come back and actually torque all of them. Alright, they're all at least snug, so now to 85 foot-pounds. You can hear this torque wrench. The way it works is that I set the torque reading that I'm trying to achieve here, like a micrometer, and it makes that click sound when it reaches torque. So I've now torqued all of them down. Again, now all we have to do is remove these. And that Plastigage is round. It's just a round tube. I guess it's not a tube. It's just a round piece of plastic, and it flattens out. And the amount that it flattens out makes it wider the other direction. And since it's very accurate, how far it widens out equates to what the amount that it's smashed down to. We'll take one out and take a look. It's best not to use your torque wrench to pull things apart, so I'm going to go grab a breaker bar. Alright, so let's take a look at how this works. Alright, so we've pulled that cap off. You can see the Plastigage is on here. So we just take the packaging. One side, you have millimeters. The other side, you have inches. So we'll measure this here. It looks like it's about the width of this green band right here. It's a little bit wider than that, so it's about that. So you can see, maybe, if I can get it to focus. There we go. So it's the width of the first green band here. So it's 0.002 inches. So that is within spec for this journal.
So how exactly do I know that something's in spec? This Cleveite catalog is kind of nice. It's got a lot of information in it, things like what to look for bearing failures, what causes typical things like that, but here we go. On this page, how much clearance do your bearings need? And you can see here, for most applications, it's about 7.5 to 1/1000th of an inch per inch of shaft diameter. So if we pull down and take a look at the main bearings on a Chrysler 360, oh, there it was right there. So here's the Chrysler 5.9. We know that our mains, these are rod bearings. A little bit further down, the main bearing shaft diameter, 2.8. Let's just throw up the calculator. So 2.8 times 0.00075 inches gives us just over 2 thousandths, which is just about what we measured. Perfect.
So we know that this main journal and these bearings are correct. Plastigage, we can just leave it there. It's oil soluble, so we don't have to try to get it off of there. So now, I'm just going to pull the other 4 of them off and measure them, make sure they're all good as well. Okay, so we know all of the main journals are within specification on this. So this is ready to go. All right, so now we're going to reassemble this guy. We'll start at the rear. We need to take the rear main seal. Again, the wide part here goes toward the inside of the motor, so toward the bearing. In there. Tap it in a little bit to get it even. All right, so this one is important here. We're going to use a little bit of RTV. Basically the ends, the 2 ends here, we want RTV just right here and right here that will seal between the 2 bearings to make it one complete circle so oil doesn't weep between them. We only need a little bit. We're not trying to caulk a bathtub here. So if you look at that, just going to put a little bit on there like that. And then do the same on the other side. We want to put some assembly lube on that seal and fully coat the bearing as well. Again, don't worry about this one's got Plastigage on the bearing as well. It's oil soluble, so just leave it alone. It's not going to cause any problems. You definitely don't want to try scraping it off of there because you might damage the bearing. The threads are still lubricated from when I just assembled it, so I don't need to do it again. I'm going to follow the same procedure as before. I'll run them in by hand. Once I have all of the caps in, I'll go back, tighten them down, and then run around them again, torque them to spec. Yeah, so one final test. Now that I've got it assembled and torqued, I'll just take the harmonic balancer, slide it on so that it's on the keyway. Doesn't need to be on all the way. You should be able to rotate the crankshaft without any problem. If you have any trouble rotating the crankshaft, make sure your caps are in order and turned the correct way. Again, the alignment tabs should meet together for when it's torqued down. It's a little bit difficult to turn, definitely more difficult than when you were taking it apart if you tried, because the bearing clearances are going to be tighter and this assembly lube is much thicker. But that's all there is to it. Next up is to install the pistons. We'll do the check the bearing clearance with Plastigage on all of the connecting rods and continue assembly. One last note, cleanliness is extremely important as you're assembling this. We don't want any dust, grime, any kind of grit that'll get in there and damage our bearings, rings, whatever. So if you're not doing it all at one time, cover it up. I've got some plastic here. A lawn and leaf garbage bag works great, anything like that. But you want to make sure that you always cover it anytime you're not working on it. That's it. Thanks for watching.